Here we go. We are going live. Another live online lesson event here with Shauheen Nakhjavani. This is going to be super cool, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. People are pouring in, which is great to see. We've got four students. I was going to say guinea pigs, but we're not experimenting on anything here. We're going to make them absolute superstars. Four students, all relatively good golfers, all that have been playing for a long time. And as we often see on Skillest, we often attract the student that has known for quite some time that there's just something radically wrong or drastically wrong, or even as a good golfer. So we've got some 3 handicappers and some 7 handicappers here. There's still like this big chunk missing out of their game where they have enough random shots that they feel like they're dropping 3 or 4 shots around. So I was just sort of saying to the gents before we even kicked off that even at that level, like a 3 handicapper, there's always so much room to move, to improve and get, better control over your ball flight. So this is going to be really, really interesting. Shauheen, welcome, mate, once again. Good to have you on a beautiful sunny day. How you been?
Ironically enough, you can't really see because it looks light outside, but it's actually raining over here. So.
Oh, you're joking. Right.
One of those days. All is good.
What's happening, mate? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So, mate, how, just really, really quickly, because we want to dive into this because we've got 4 gents. We want to give them about 10, 15 minutes each or so. But, mate, first US Open experience with Yannik. Paul, you were saying you've been working with Yannik since about 2017.
Yeah.
How was the whole event? I mean, obviously the course at Brookline just looked absolutely awesome. What was it like?
Course was in really good shape. I would say that I am really not surprised Tiger pulled out a couple of weeks before the event. I think he had 0 chance of walking that golf course, to be honest.
Right.
I consider myself in pretty good shape, and my body was sore after 3.5 days of walking it. I can only imagine trying to swing the club with a body that's obviously not up to his standards. The course was great. I mean, really difficult. It was really weird because there's so many blind shots that if you miss the fairway, the rough was so thick, you just can't take a chance trying to get to the green. A lot of false fronts, a lot of water surrounding some of the greens. So Yannik shot 77 the first day, and he basically told me after the round that he striped it, but you miss 4 or 5 fairways by this much and you can't get to the green and you're just scrambling the whole day. So you were almost, it was a weird course where you, in the sense of you're almost better off missing really big because you can get lucky and land in a trampled area versus missing short where the rough is so pristine and so thick and juicy that like you just have no chance.
Yeah, right. Really interesting. And so what's his next steps? Has he qualified for the British Open?
No, so he's playing the next 2 PGA Tour events, the Barracuda and the Barbasol, which I believe are opposite field events for the Open, and then I think for a WGC or something like that. And he's having a good season. I mean, he's top 45 on the world rank, on the DP World Tour ranking, the points list. So playing good. Had a runner-up finish a couple weeks ago. So he's playing solid. It was just US Open was just a brutal week for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. As always. So cool, mate. Well, let's dive straight into this. Our first student is Sean. Sean, how are you? Welcome to the event. This is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm doing great, thanks.
Sean, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, about obviously where you are with your game at the moment, what your handicap is, and then maybe in the past, like, things you've tried and coaches you've, worked with, and how much time you can put into your game. Like, just give us a little bit of context around everything.
Sure. I'm 56. I golfed a lot when I was a junior. I worked at a golf course for 7 years, so through high school, and then I didn't hit a ball for 17 years. Undergrad, grad school, wife, mortgage, kids, didn't have time, didn't have the money.
Totally.
Started golfing kind of, 6 times a year, and then joined a private club 11 years ago. So now I'm playing maybe 3 times a week, plus a couple trips, so 75 rounds a year. Index is about 7.5, and
that's awesome.
I've never done any online coaching. I do have a coach that I work with locally, but we'll get together. He's a busy guy, so we'll get together like 5 times a year and just do little brush ups, but nothing regular.
Yeah, and
I definitely.
that can make it hard, can't it? That can make it hard sometimes when it's just like it's a little bit too sporadic to like make sure that you're actually staying on track, and you can get lost a little bit when you're left, to your own devices, sort of thing. So, Shauheen, do you want to ask any questions and like let's dive into this thing?
For sure. The first question I'd have to ask is, is there a specific ball flight issues that you typically deal with more commonly? Because I'd have to assume with the pattern you have, I mean, I could say them, but obviously I would rather hear them from you about.
Yeah, blocks and hooks. So my irons tend to overdraw.
Mm-hmm.
I think I hit it fairly high. I think I add loft, and so I feel like I get stuck. I feel like I'm flipping.
For sure. I can't imagine when you play that you're taking the biggest divots out there.
No, I'm a bit of a picker. I'd like to take proper divot, and I'll take a proper divot with a 9-iron or a wedge, but that's unusual otherwise.
Yeah.
Follow up for you. What have you done most recently to try to correct this? Because it sounds like you obviously have some level of understanding of the fact that you're a little too stuck and a little too far from the inside. Have you tried to work on anything with that coach or just yourself that you've seen on the internet or something like that to try and correct it?
No, I'm trying to exit a little more left. You could probably tell from here that shanks happen occasionally. Thankfully, shanks happen on the range. My range sessions if I hit balls for 90 minutes, they tend to get worse as the 90 minutes goes on. Yeah. So,
is the only thing you've done from a technical point of view just to try to exit more left to try to get less stuck?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the last question I would have to ask, just for the sake of what information I'm going to give you, is do you have any sort of physical limitations I should know about?
None.
Obviously. Okay. Everything is pretty good.
Yep. Okay,
cool. Well, look, I mean, you can see right off the bat, when you're taking the club back, you can kind of advance it a little bit, Baden. The club whips inside. I personally am not someone who cares that much about the takeaway being slightly inside. I would argue that it's much more concerning if it's affecting other areas outside of just the takeaway. The biggest concern that I have is kind of twofold. There's two separate ways usually a player like you can try to correct being stuck. And I would say the only reason this is the case, you can kind of go all the way to the top for a second, Baden. You get the club shallowing out really well. So the club, it's not like it works really in front of your body coming down to where you have to do something to try to like correct it at the last second. I actually really like the shaft movement overall. I like the fact that it's working behind your body coming down, because that frees you up to a lot of opportunity with what you can do with your body, which I think is super important, okay? I would say there's two things really that are playing a huge factor in the fact that obviously your attack angle is too shallow because you're kind of picking the ball clean. Usually when a player is too shallow and they're coming so far from the inside, it gets really hard to create any sort of shaft lane. So that's why you kind of see a lot of that like scoopy release at the bottom. Obviously, that's going to create a lot of loft, so you're just going to hit it way too high. You're not really compressing the ball as much as I'm sure you would like. There's two things that play a huge factor in that. I would say the first one is where you end up at the top of your backswing really could be much more efficient. So if you want to just go back, fade in, and kind of stop it at the top, your left arm, you can kind of see it really low and across your chest in your backswing there. So, we would call this hand depth. It basically just means like how far behind the body the hands are getting in your golf swing. When you start to see this left arm here at the top not be in a taller position, but rather one that is much lower and much more across the body, this plays a huge role in how much more from the inside this club is going to work coming down into the golf swing. So like halfway down, if you want to lower this, just like one frame, go back a little bit, Ben. Just like 2 frames back there if you can. Just one more. Yeah, so your left arm there is so far across the body, the hands look like they're caught just way too far behind you. And so facilitating that, now we can obviously talk about how the body's moving through the ball, and we're going to get into that in a second, but just having the left arm not be so low and so far across the body, and just having it be in a slightly more upright position. Almost think of like a good reference point for a guy like you would be like Justin Thomas and how upright his arm is. Now, I wouldn't want you to nearly go that extreme with how high the arms are, because obviously his is like a really, really extreme case. But I certainly would want you to work more towards that direction with the arm plane at the top of the backswing. Because naturally, if I'm not here and I'm a little bit more up at the top and like my arm plane's a little bit more taller, it'll just naturally be a lot easier for me to get the hands and club working a little bit more in front of me, which in your case basically means just avoiding it falling so far behind you where you get way too shallow.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah, that would be the first really obvious thing. And to be honest, if you would have told me when I asked you, like, do you have any physical limitations? And you would have told me like, yeah, I just, my hip flexor's tight, or I can't really create a lot of rotation. I would say that's really your best option, because if you can't get your body moving better, that's really the only thing we can rely on, is getting the arm plane a lot taller. Because I wouldn't want you to feel like you have to like feel over the top and whipping the club in front of you, because that's kind of a dangerous game where you can overdo it really fast. So to not manipulate the shaft too much, but let it kind of happen organically, I would just get your arm plane in a taller position, and that would help you out a lot. Now, given the fact that obviously you said you don't have any sort of physical limitations, then 100% I would try to get your body moving better. So at the top of your backswing, everything looks pretty decent for the most part. I like the fact that your knees have changed flex a little bit, which I believe is crucial for a guy like you to not kind of get stuck. So your right leg obviously is not nearly as flexed as your left leg. That's why you kind of see a gap between the knees there. Really, really good turn. The upper body has obviously rotated a lot. I would argue, if anything, that's also a big reason why your arms are so flat and across your body, is because of this huge turn. But I wouldn't want you to restrict the turn, because then you're going to start to cost yourself some club head speed. So I like the rotation. I would just want the arm plane to be slightly taller relative to that. Coming down really is where all of the things kind of fall apart to some degree. There's obviously a really, really big lateral shift with the lower body towards the target. Now, I don't know how much emphasis you put on this with your coach, but for me personally, it's always going to be really hard to create rotation in the downswing when you're shifting your body so aggressively sideways. Right. I always like to tell people the pivot, or like the way the body works, is kind of a three-dimensional world. There's lateral movement, there's rotational movement, and then there's like tilting up and down, or side to side, let's say. When you have such an extreme amount of lateral movement towards the target in the downswing, it gets really hard to create any level of rotation. Obviously, if your body's not rotating at all, the hands are just going to get stuck way, way back there, because one of the biggest influences really of getting this club to work back in front of you is if you rotate. So like I'm on a chair here, right? So if let's say I'm in this position here, and I'll try to recreate your backswing a little bit. If I literally just swivel on this chair and I create a lot of rotation, as I'm creating this rotation, you'll see my hands start to work more and more in front of my body. See that there? So if I'm lacking that rotational component and I'm just sliding towards the target, you're really going to see these hands lower a lot from there. So they're not going to have a very outward direction. They're going to drop a lot more. And if you're already starting from a flat position, and then on top of that, you're sliding a lot coming down into the golf ball, you just have no chance. The hands and the club are just going to get so far stuck under the plane that, of course, you're just going to get very, very shallow coming through the golf ball. It's going to be a very difficult thing to try to make work. And obviously that's where you stall, you flip at it to try to square the face, because if you don't flip at it, that ball's just going to start a mile right, and obviously it's never going to come back. It's just not going to give you too many chances to succeed there. So if you pull back up the swing there for a second, Baden, what I would suggest for a guy like you as you're working through that process, number one priority where you would see literally immediate results is getting the arm pulling taller. So feeling almost the hands like in front of your body in the backswing, and then try to stretch them a little bit more up and not so far like low and across your chest. That alone already would reduce the damage. Now, it wouldn't obviously correct it fully, but it would play a massive role in trying to get that to work better. Then from there, we have to work on that whole lateral component. So you just can't be standing here and just having so much of this lateral shifting where you're really bumping aggressively to the target. And I always like to show this example here, okay? So if I just stand and I'm dead weight, like I'm not going to create any sort of restrictions. If I literally just push my hips towards the target aggressively and I'm dead weight, naturally to try to keep me in balance, you're going to see my upper body collapse back away from the target, right? So when you're looking at your golf swing, like there's obviously this huge lateral component, but the ripple effect from that is that your left shoulder gets so high coming down into the ball and your right shoulder gets so low. If I recreate that from this angle and I just slide and tilt back, look where that club's going. Yep. I don't really have much of a chance there, right? So when we're trying to get you to really work better through the golf ball, well, number one, obviously the arm plane just being taller is going to help. But then number two, I would almost create some sort of obstruction here. Like you can almost just stick an alignment stick into the ground. And you would have to work on feeling a lot of rotation of the upper body without the lower body bouncing so aggressively to the target. It's going to feel very weird at first. It's obviously going to have a very like over the top feeling with the chest to some degree. But that's really the only way we'd be able to minimize the damage of the hip sliding so far to the target and almost getting this chest to feel like it's turning more level and not just like the left shoulder getting so upright on you. So if you can kind of see it right there, like just go back a couple frames, Baden, just right around impact there. You can see how the hands are so far behind the body and the left shoulder just gets so tall through the ball. Obviously, that's just going to put you into that trouble position. So if we can, yeah, exactly that. So if we can get your lower body to not shift so aggressively and you get the upper body to really be the engine of your feel starting down and just getting it to rotate as aggressively as possible, you would get the hands to work out and a little bit better. You wouldn't be nearly as stuck coming down. And if you combine that with the backswing change, I mean, your ball would be solved literally like this. You'd be able to come down on a much better. You'd make much better contact on the ball. At least you would start to hit more down on it and create some better divots in the right spot.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. So you still want a bump, but you want like a 3-inch bump, not a 9-inch bump, right?
Well, okay. So we've done a lot of analysis on 3D softwares with tour players. There are obviously some players that can get away with sliding a little bit more than others. But I would say the general average is somewhere in that 3 to 4 inch range, but not upwards of like 6, 7, 8 inches, because that's where it really starts to create a compromise to how the body is rotating through the ball. Yeah. So in your case, you would have to almost feel like it doesn't slide at all just to cut that in half and actually only have it shift, let's say, that 3 degrees that you want to be seeing. Yeah.
And how would someone integrate that, Shauheen? So, take that information and then, because obviously, Sean, the toughest thing is that Sean wants to play on Saturday probably and, shoot even par or whatever. So how do you take that information and then, digest it and then slowly integrate it into what he needs to do?
Right. So right away, the fact that you have 2 different points of focus that you can have between the arm plane and the backswing and then how kind of the body's moving through the golf ball, you would have to only prioritize one and not try to do both together because that's just going to be a nightmare scenario. Now, the advantage is both of them are going to equally benefit your golf swing. So I don't really necessarily have a preference on which one you would focus on. My personal suggestion would be the backswing just because I find it's a little bit easier to focus on a backswing movement. The variables usually aren't traveling as fast. You can kind of have a little more awareness into where things are so you can feel it out better. So if you were to go play, I would just hit a bunch of shots on the golf course or on the range beforehand. Grab a wedge or a mid iron or a short iron, kind of start off obviously a little bit easier. Just try to feel the hand staying in front of you and staying taller and just hitting some shots. You might experience some pulls naturally if you're overdoing it a little bit during those rehearsals. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. If anything, it's defining that you're creating a change, which we should see that as positive.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Sean?
Yeah, excellent.
And just be patient. That's the hardest thing, is just being patient and chipping away at it and being deliberate, stand in front of mirrors, do that stuff. Trying to take that and then, go straight out onto the tee on Saturday is, very difficult. But, just give yourself time and integrate it over time. So, but yeah, that was awesome, Shauheen. That's just absolutely spot on. So, okay, awesome, Sean. So let's get into Todd. How are you, Todd?
Hi, Baden. Fine, thank you.
What's the story? Tell us about your history, hopes, and dreams, and everything.
Okay, I'm 58 years old. I've been playing golf for 25 years. My index is 3.5. I do play competitively in Connecticut in the amateur ranks, senior, mostly senior amateur events. I do find when I get under the gun a little bit competing that I get really steep through the neck. I kind of catch a lot of toe shots. I did have a back fusion in 2020, L5S1. Full fusion, but I'm moving okay. the rotation is not bad. I mean, I think if I don't rotate, it's because I'm just not good at rotating. It's not my back surgery, to be honest with you. My miss tends to be because the handle is high coming through, because the shaft generally tends to be in my neck, that I either hit a pull with a closed club face or a square club face. And then if I don't get the club face square, I block it, or, kind of slice it to the right a little bit. So I kind of get a two-way miss going. So, even though I'm a 3.5, I do get very inconsistent. And it seems to be when I'm competing, it's the weirdest thing. I feel like I get loose. The club feels like it gets really long in my hand, and I really can't figure that out.
Right. Cool. Shauheen.
The first thing that stands out to me in this video is your alignment looks pretty far left there. Is that intentional, or is that just something you fall into the trap of when you're on the golf course?
No, I would say that's intentional. That's something I kind of got from reading Bender's book. He always said err a little bit more to the left and then kind of look out to the right. So that's really where that comes from. So that's where I got that. Yeah, that is intentional.
Okay, so I'm going to say a couple of things regarding alignment, because I think this plays a major factor in getting you to do what we're going to talk about, okay?
Okay.
I can see where Bender's point of view is. Now, the one thing that Mike does a good job of with a lot of his students is he really gets them to shallow the club really well, and he's not someone who tends to prefer a lot of upper body rotation through the ball. And we all have our preferences in how we like to shape the golf swing, whatever, which is totally fine. The thing is, because he's really good at getting players to draw the ball and coming down from a very shallow position, his idea of the alignment being left is to offset that, to make it work together. The problem is, when you're somebody who's naturally a steeper player on the golf ball, all else being equal, the more you aim left, the steeper you're going to get on that golf ball.
Okay.
So you have to be careful, because I can understand someone's point of view, but alignment is very subjective to the player and the type of pattern that they're creating. So when you're somebody who's coming down, like for example, okay, you can get out of the screen there for a second, Baden, just so I can kind of show this. You won't be able to see my feet because the space is a little tight, but I'll lower just for the sake of this, right? Let's say I'm really, really steep coming down into the golf ball. Well, the more I start to shift my alignment to the right, look how much more shallow this club looks relative to the ball that's on the floor. The more I start to aim my alignment more and more left, look how much steeper I'm getting onto this golf ball, right?
Right.
So the problem is, when you're somebody who already is delivering this upright handle and you're coming down with the shaft running through the neck, like you spoke about, where it's clearly too upright coming down into the golf ball, the more you aim left, the harder you're making that environment to be able to actually fix the steep shaft. Like, the more and more likely you're going to be to bring the club down on that steep plane. So we have to be careful, because yes, there's an intent there for you, but the intent is not actually helping your objective. In fact, I actually think it's penalizing it quite a bit.
Understood.
I would argue, and this is where I was going to ask, obviously, about some physical tendencies, and you mentioned the back fusion. If you were someone who would have been unable to create a better rotation in the backswing. Now, I'll relate this to the first student. We spoke about how rotation can manipulate where the hands are going in the golf swing, right? So the more I rotate my body coming down this way, the more the hands are going to work in front of me. But that also means, if we're referring to the backswing, the more rotation I'm going to create in this direction, the more these hands are going to work naturally more behind me, correct?
Right.
So if you're somebody who would not have been able to create a bigger turn in the backswing to get the hands a little more behind you to facilitate shallowing the club, I would argue in that situation, I would rather you aim a mile to the right. Because the more right you aim, the more you'll actually bring the club on a shallower plane. Now, is it somewhat of a Band-Aid? Of course, but if you would have had a physical limitation, it would have actually helped your golf swing if you aim more right, okay? So when you go to the golf course, you have to be careful with what you're trying to accomplish. And in your case, if your goal is to get rid of the poles and to get rid of the fact that this shaft angle is coming down too steep, you're far better off always making sure your right foot, if anything, is pulled back and you're aiming more right as opposed to aiming more left, because that's just playing into the problem every single time.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
So Okay, perfect. So Baden, pull the swing back up.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, alignment is only part of the problem, right? Part of the problem is how can we get this club coming down on a shallower plane without just kind of band-aiding it through the alignment. And this is where the whole conversation about rotation comes into play, because the alignment is going to make it harder to rotate. But then on top of that, if you pull this all the way to the top of the backswing, I do believe there's a lot of space there for you to create a better rotation in the backswing. Now, if it's a question of why you're not doing it, if you feel as though it's not the back injury related, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I actually have a hernia or a bulging disc in my L5-S1, so I know exactly what that feels like. And so if you were compensating for the injury, it's a different story. But if you feel as though you're able to create better rotation, then we would have to talk about how. Have you ever tried to increase that range of motion, or is it something that you just haven't found a field that's connected to you?
Yeah, no, I hit the gym 5-6 days a week, and I foam roll, I do stretching, weight training, mobility training. I was doing some of the online app mobility stuff. So I feel like I can turn. I just it's a mechanic that I'm just not really good at yet. I've been trying to create more lean back so I can feel like I'm getting more of a turn, and I've been trying different stuff.
So that's kind of my follow-up question is, what specifically have you tried to do with the body? Has there been a point of focus or a body part or something that you've tried to focus on to try to get the bigger turn?
Trying to make my right hip go, back and around, kind of feel like my spine is going back towards my left foot, and rotate around my left hip and get more of a turn that way. If you follow that.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that I see a lot with players, which I find actually makes it harder for them to rotate, is they don't focus enough on the left knee. Okay. So the left knee is a major contributor in how much pelvic rotation you can create in the backswing. And not a lot of people think about it. So Baden, put a circle down right on his left kneecap. And then I want you to see the first 4 or 5 frames of the golf swing. Try to do it from the face-on point of view if you can.
Oh, yeah.
And I want you to look at the first 3, 4, 5 frames of that backswing and look at how inactive your left knee is going. There's almost nothing taking place there. So the problem is that left knee only starts to work inward, meaning towards your right leg, in the later stages of your backswing. So for the first half of your backswing, you're really not making it easy on yourself to create the rotation you want to be getting because your left knee is just not working in front of you. Keep in mind, every action has a reaction, meaning your left side has to have a play in your right side getting more back. So for you to get your right hip further back, your right leg has to straighten out some amount, but your left knee also needs to fold in to bring the left part of your body in front of you. You get it? So it's not just a question of the right side trying to get behind you. It's also a question of the left side trying to get in front of you. It almost acts as a circle like this. So if you started to free up that left knee to add some bend and to work more into your right side way earlier in your backswing, you would make it way easier for you to create the rotation that you're actually trying to accomplish. Much more closer to the lines that he's drawn out there.
Understood.
And to be honest, use every body part to your advantage. Feel free to lift your left heel if it allows you to facilitate that movement as well. You don't have to keep that foot so flat down.
Right.
If your focal point was the left knee there, and that's like your first idea is, okay, left hip comes in front of me, left knee bends down and kind of in front of me, you would make it so much easier on yourself to get the right hip around you. And obviously the domino effect of that is if your right hip gets more behind you, your hands work more around you. Now your arm plane isn't so kind of narrow and stuck in front of your body, and you would be able to get the club coming down a little more shallow.
Right. Understood.
That would be kind of the ripple effect of what we're seeing there. But I don't think your swing is far off. I just think your alignment is not doing you any favors. You definitely need to start shifting that thing more to the right relative to the target. And you need to free up that left knee. If you do the combination of those 2 things, I'm pretty sure that sleeve shaft would go away. Or at the bare minimum, you would cut it by 70, 80% pretty much overnight.
Okay. So just quick follow-up. So just kind of driving that left knee to the right then is that what I'm just...
Yeah, so I like the feel that you're having with the right hip. I don't necessarily think you need to stop thinking about that. I just want you to have a trigger for the start of your takeaway to be much more focused on the left knee and the left side.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you think about the alignment thing really quickly, Todd, as well, like if you go back to what Hogan did, like as he worked through the bag, the more he wanted to shallow it, the more shut off he was with his feet, and the more he wanted to steepen it, the more open he got with his feet. So with his wedges, he would always start with his left foot back, and with his driver, he would always start with his right foot back. If you go back and look at all of his literature, it would progressively go more and more left foot out, right foot back the longer the club got, because he wanted to bring it more around into impact, shallow out that angle of attack sort of thing. So exactly as Shauheen said, so this is what Hogan would do to try and steepen the club, and it's exactly what you're doing at the start. Does that make sense?
Yes, understood. Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
actually, you can relate this to even a guy like Rory. If you ever see Rory in person, he tends to aim extremely far left with his feet. It's because he's naturally someone who's so shallow to an extreme that the way he tries to offset that problem is by aiming left. But now if you're someone who's steeper and you're aiming left, it's not really helping you. It's kind of bringing the club the other way.
Understood. Thank you, Shauheen. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And the good thing about that, I think, is probably that a lot of it's a little bit of setup, isn't it, really, Todd? You know what I mean? Get your setup right and just you're probably going to be able to go around a little bit more. You know, it's not like some incredibly complex, like, you know, biomechanical move that needs to happen in the middle of your down. Just like get your setup a little bit better and a little bit of that initial move, and it should set the rest of it up.
I would argue it would make it so much easier for him to turn just through the setup, even if he didn't focus on the left knee at all, to be honest.
Thank you.
Awesome, Todd. Okay, Ben.
All right, so yeah, I'm 37 now, so I played a heap of golf when I was in my teens and sort of early 20s, and got down to sort of scratch +1. But then I guess once I got to sort of uni, I sort of had a bit of a layoff with my golf, and more recently started playing a bit more regularly. But just finding golf a lot more difficult than I once did. Probably my main issue at the moment is I've got a bit of a pull sort of draw that creeps up. And when you're missing left, you get in a lot of trouble. Obviously, no sort of history of injuries or anything like that. I guess my mobility is nowhere near as good as it once was. But yeah, in terms of what I'm working on at the moment is probably just trying to get a bit more rotation through the ball. I feel like I get a little bit stuck, and then my sort of the club head sort of shuts down a bit, sort of in that late downswing, and that gives that sort of that pull draw that I mentioned. So just trying to work on my rotation through the ball, and on my backswing, trying to keep my elbows a bit sort of closer together. But that's probably about it at the moment. So a little bit lost with where to sort of go next, I guess.
Pretty good goal swing.
Well, it's certainly close.
Yeah, it's very close.
Okay, so a couple follow-up questions. The obvious question is, what have you tried to do to create more rotation through the ball?
Look, I'm trying to sort of lay the shaft down more in the downswing so I can actually rotate, because I feel like because I'm a little bit steep in the downswing, if I rotate hard, I just hit it even further sort of left. If that makes sense. So
yeah, right.
So you feel as though if you rotate to the left, the path is just going to get too far left on you, and it's just going to start further left.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. What are you trying to do to shallow it? Is that why you're talking about the elbow trying to stay more in front of your body?
Just trying to keep the elbows a little bit tighter together on the way back. Because I feel like if I can do that, then I can sort of lay it down a bit better in the downswing.
Right. What are you doing to do that? Are you just like putting a ball between the elbows, or working on one of those?
Or just like a TheraBand around my arms.
Right. Okay. Have you seen success with any of this stuff? Is it a question of? Is it a question of like you haven't applied enough time to it to see it stick permanently?
Yeah, probably, I guess, but definitely sort of seeing improvements. But I still have that quick sort of pull draw that's in there sometimes. I just feel like when you can sort of feel it sort of halfway down in the downswing, the club just starts to shut down. Basically, my arm sort of just flies off my body, and it's that sort of quick pull.
Right. I will say, and I want you to leave it right in that frame, Baden, on the down the line view. I personally think a bigger factor in you missing it way left is the fact that your face angle is too strong. Do you have an intended shot shape when you're playing? Are you trying to hit a specific curve? Do you have a preference in like to
not
go?
really. I hit a draw probably naturally, but I'd like to hit it probably a bit straighter, I guess.
Right. So here's the thing that I come across quite often with players, okay, is that if you're going to try to create more rotation through the ball, the rotation will obviously prevent the club from being stuck behind you. It'll certainly bring it on a steeper plane. I don't quite necessarily see that your swing would be too steep in doing that. I would have to obviously see you applying that feel to be able to actually comment on it. But to me, your club head actually looks like it lays down pretty good. Now, it certainly lays down maybe a little bit later than I would like. I do believe keeping the arms together would probably help with, the structure of where the club is at the top and how it transitions. So I certainly think you're on the right track with a lot of the information you're trying to apply to your golf swing. I just see that this club head is so toe down that when you rotate at first, you're probably still going to have a little bit of some releasing that happens. There's obviously a lot of this idea on the internet that the more I rotate, like the more passive the hands are going to get. That's certainly true to some degree, but it doesn't mean that the second I start rotating better, all of a sudden I'm going to stop magically releasing the club over. Like there's still going to be some level of activity because of how you're used to releasing your hands that's going to linger in there. And the problem is if that club head is already very toe down, like in the later stages of your downswing, you need a significant amount of lean to the club to straighten that out and offset it. If you release the hands at all, you're not going to have that shaft lean, or you won't have the amount that's required for you. The ball's going to start left every single time. So I actually think, personally, it would be far easier for you to commit to the rotation and not see the ball start left right off the bat if the club face wasn't as strong as it was. In fact, I actually think you would be able to do it almost instantly because you would never see that ball start left anymore. Keep in mind, like, our psyche plays such a strong role in what we do when we're trying to hit a golf ball. If I feel like I'm going to rotate and I have this subconscious fear of it going way left, well, what are you going to naturally start to do to avoid it going left? You're going to start to stay close with the body, and you're going to start to release everything out to the right because you're afraid if you turn, the ball just is going to start left. It's never going to come back to your target, right? So like this idea of the body staying close and releasing everything out to the right is a subconscious fear of it going left so that the ball can start right and actually draw back and at least have a chance of landing on your target. Whereas if, let's say, for example, the grip was a little bit weaker than it is, and grip is, like everything else, very subjective to the player pattern, right? The way your wrist works coming down, your left wrist tends to obviously be in some amount of bowing or flexion to it. So obviously that's a big contributor combined with how strong the grip is, that the face gets closed. So if your grip was a little bit weaker, now you take the exact same combination that you have, but instead of the face being toe down at that point, it's a little bit more neutral or even toe up slightly. Now you can turn as hard as you want, and obviously the face is not going to be as close. The ball will never start nearly as far left. In fact, for you, you might even, if anything, almost overfade it at first in trying to kind of blend those movements together. So the advantage of that is, hey, all of a sudden now I'm seeing a very different pattern in practice. That's a good thing. That means I'm working away from the tendency I have of obviously flipping at it and just going a mile left.
Yeah.
And I've worked with Darren for 2 years. Yeah. I know exactly what that swing looks like. And obviously, if you go back just a couple of frames there on Darren's golf swing, you'll clearly see that his face angle, I know it's a wedge in his hands there, but you'll clearly see the face angle isn't nearly as strong and toe down coming down into the golf ball as yours is, right?
Yeah.
Darren loves to fade it. He hates missing left as much as anybody. So for a player like that to try to avoid the ball just starting left every single time when he's hitting shots, well, you get the toe slightly up, you turn the body, the face stays passive, and then you might see a little bit more of a fade bias at first, but for sure that left miss is going to go away.
Yeah.
So my early suggestion to you would be the first thing you've got to do is weaken the grips just a small amount. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but just to get the face angle into a more appropriate position for your intention so that you have a little bit more freedom to turn through it and not miss it, obviously, just with the pull draw every single time. Or straight. I would assume when you're trying to turn hard on it, it's probably more of just a straight pull. I can't imagine as much curve on it because obviously you're straightening the path out, but the face is just closed, right?
Yeah, spot on.
Would you agree with that's what you're seeing, right? So,
Yeah.
it's clear that in you rotating better, you can fix the path problem that you have that's just a little bit too far right that creates the pull draw. But then you have to match the face angle to that so that it doesn't just become a straight pull every time. The easiest way for a player of your skill level to do that is just weaken your grip. I wouldn't want you to have to feel something crazy of like, I'm trying to roll the face open into takeaway or anything like that, because that's just a nightmare game that a player is going to play. Usually when I see people do that, they either like create too much forearm rotation to try to prevent the face from being closed in the takeaway, or they just start to cup the wrist so much that the club starts to come down really steep, and then it creates, it's a domino effect of problems in other areas. So to not try to manipulate the shaft movement too much, but still change the face angle, weakening the grip is probably your best play there.
Mm.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Would you even suggest like hitting a few little shots like Darren's hitting here as well, where it feels like it's a little bit open, it's coming down a touch more open, it's going to feel like a little spinny wedgy sort of thing is probably going to help as well.
I mean, to be honest, it almost has to feel like a low pull cut for him because the rotation is naturally to feel like he's de-lofting it a lot. But then obviously the face is staying somewhat much more square with the weaker grip, and it's going to feel like it's probably just going to be like a low straight ball that kind of leaks to the right.
Totally. Well, that's
the idea. We're just working away from the pull draw.
Totally. Because that's the thing when you look at this band, like through the ball, Darren looks like he's almost trying to make it go left, isn't he, with his top half and with his arms? He's actually going around so much more, this way, obviously, with his top, isn't he? So there's the rotation around. But it's hard to do with a sharp face or too strong here, through here. It really looks like you're going, don't go left. You're like hitting it out to the right a lot more there, right?
That's kind of my point. Like as a general rule of thumb, one of the most common patterns we see all the time is higher handicaps have the face angle that gets too open. What do? To try to avoid a slice, they hit really down and left across it to try to get the face started square. Really good players, you almost see the inverse pattern. You see face angles that get too strong, and then they naturally start to stall out and swing out to the right to try to make sure that it doesn't just become this pull draw. Now, obviously, it's still going to create some form of a hook, but at least it gives you a chance of starting it right. So just weakening the face, I think, would just be a much better starting point for you and give you a chance at the bare minimum.
Yeah, no, thanks, man.
Do you find as well, Ben, you're sort of limited in the type of shots you can hit around greens as well? Do you find sometimes you can't get it to spin quite as much, or, those, high little floaty shots that come back and like you can't really hit that sort of shot?
Yeah, ball gets away from you a lot quicker than it when I'm chipping, for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to be aggressive around the greens and things like that because it just wants to come out a bit hot sort of thing. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I reckon, mate, I'll send you that Darren Clark model and you can just have a look at that non-stop, and that'll be a pretty good model to have a look at and work at your pitching that way, I reckon, and then build it up into the bigger one.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, mate.
That's all right. Any further questions on that, mate? You got it?
Yep, got it. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. How good's that? So just changing lives. That's amazing.
Straightforward is usually a good thing. If you're coming out of there with 40 questions, I probably did something wrong in how I communicated.
Totally. 100%. Chris, how are you? You're on the road.
Good. I'll tell you what, it's interesting being the fourth one up here. I feel like I'm a little bit of a mixture of the first three.
Yeah, right. Well, everyone's always a bit of a Frankenstein, aren't they, of like what they've seen their friends do, what they've been told to do, what coaches have told them to do, what they've read in golf.com. We end up like just a mixture of absolutely everyone. So why do you feel that way? Like, what do you think is traditionally the thing that just does your head in about your golf swing, or like, what's good about it? What give us a little bit of context.
Yeah, so, used to play more casually. I'd say in the last 5 years, kind of became like an instruction junkie. Been on Skillest for a while, on YouTube quite frequently. Started videoing my swing constantly. So, I kind of feel like I know what my problem areas are. It's just, like most fixes in the golf swing, it's a slow road.
Totally. Let me just grab it up really, really quickly. What are you playing off at the moment?
I hover in the mid single digits.
Cool. All right. Yep. What you miss?
And so for me, like my miss is very similar. I like to play a small draw. Most of my misses are the ball starting straight and drawing left. So misses left. Pull draws.
Gotcha. Isn't that interesting?
And the two big things that I'm working on are, kind of not getting flat and inside on the takeaway, and then not getting the hand so far stuck behind my body coming down.
Yeah. How have you gone through that process?
Yeah, just trying to work on feeling like the club stays outside my hands at the start is probably the biggest thing. And then coming down, I'm trying to think, just rotate. Don't bump at all. Like stay on the right side and just pull the left side back.
You feel as though you have too much lateral movement coming into the golf ball?
Yeah, I think I did. I feel like my, converse to what you were telling the second guy was I feel like my left knee comes in too much on the backswing, and I turn a ton.
You feel like it's hard at that point to try to get the body?
Yeah, because I feel like I have to move to get that knee back. I have to move like my whole hip to get back in line to be able to push off the ground there.
You mentioned your preference is to hit a draw right now?
Yes, yeah. I've never been able to hit anything left to right.
Is your preference to hit a draw because of that, or is your preference to hit a draw because you actually prefer the ball flight?
I actually prefer the ball flight as well.
Okay. Well, I'll say this. You definitely are a combination kind of all three in the sense of, and I don't even mean it in a negative way. I just mean it more in the sense of you obviously have a very specific combination of movements that work for your golf swing that you have to kind of be careful in what you're going to change because the whole chain of events can kind of fall apart. I mean, it's very clear just on the right half of the screen there how far out in front of you the hands obviously get into the downswing and obviously how much steeper the club is. So in a situation like this, it's like I get that you're trying to turn, but I am not surprised at all that you slide and stay back or have some amount of tilting back at the last second, because that is essential. I mean, look how much extension your head had in the last quarter of the golf swing, right? There's obviously a lot of standing up and staying behind it. A lot of that is built to try to get you to draw the ball because, number one, you obviously have an intent behind it because you prefer it. But then number two, well, similar to the last guy, you obviously have somewhat of a stronger club face position, right? The club face angle is clearly very sharp. So when you look at like this frame right there, go back one frame there for a second, Baden, to just one after that. Yeah. The left arm is so far out in front of your body and the club face is obviously in a very strong position. Everything in that scenario is built to hit a straight pull when you're there. So what are you going to naturally start to do to get the path more right? Because obviously it wants to work left right now with how far out in front of you the hands are. And with the face angle being closed, you have no chance of starting the ball anywhere near your intended start line. So how do you get that ball to go to the right and to play a draw, which is your preference? You just have to jump and stay behind it a ton. That's essentially your big shallowing move. So here is the dangerous situation that you're in, because I do want to give you some warning about any kind of route you go with your golf swing, and we'll give some suggestions, okay? If you try to keep the hands in better than where they are now, meaning instead of the hands being so far out in front of you in the downswing, if you try to say, okay, well, obviously I have to jump back right now to make the swing work. So in order for me to not have to jump, I would have to have the hands not be so far out in front of me, right? So we would need to have those hands be in a little bit more of a neutral position so that there's no longer a necessity to have to jump and shallow it out at the last second. Now, the problem is if you decided to go through that type of process, early on, you can get the hands in a better spot coming down, but your body is not magically just going to be like, hey, I'm going to do this all of a sudden. Like there's obviously still going to be a lot of this guy happening, right? The reality is the way the body moves is so ingrained for most players, it just doesn't magically go away. I can certainly see it going away over time. It's not going to happen overnight, right? So if you try to go through that type of change, early on in the process, you would get the hands in a better spot. The club wouldn't be as steep on you. You would have a better environment to turn and still play the draw that you want to be playing. The problem is you're still going to jump. So what happens if now your arms aren't as in front of you They're a little more in. The club's a little more shallow, but you're still stalling at the bottom. What do you think is going to happen to that club head?
I mean, everything's gonna be off the toe.
Yeah, and it's going to be very stuck from the inside.
Right.
So the concern is then you end up in a situation where you're going to start to deliver a little bit more low point issues. You're going to start to hit a bigger hook than you were hitting before. Now, granted, it might not start as far left as it's starting right now, but it's going to be a lot of right to left curve, a lot of low point trouble. You're not going to be taking many divots. It's going to be closer to the first pattern we saw, essentially, right? On the other hand of the spectrum, if we don't change anything to how the variables are moving coming down right now, and we just say, okay, we're going to try to play a fade, we're going to try to get rid of the jumping at the bottom, and let's say we go a completely different direction with the golf swing. Well, because your arms are already so far out in front of you and the club is already steep, if you try to rotate any more or any better than you're doing, or you try to get rid of that jump that you have at the bottom, you're going to be twice as steep on the golf ball as you are right now, early into the downswing. So you're a much more particular case, which is why I wanted to bring it here, because you have a very specific blend of movements that make it work. If you try to fix the issue you have with how the body reacts at the bottom, you get too steep on it. If you try to fix the fact that the left arm is really out and the club is really steep, well, you're still going to jump at it. So you're going to end up being super far from the inside. You're going to jump from one extreme or the other, no matter what route you want to take the golf swing. It's a very dangerous game, right? And I can only imagine that if ever you've tried to change these things, that you don't immediately see your preferred results. And then it's like, well, F it. Why am I going through this process if I'm hitting it worse than I was hitting 2 seconds ago? Right?
Good
so,
guess.
Yeah. And I see players fall into that trap a lot, unfortunately. So you obviously are stuck in this like vicious cycle where you want to change something, you don't quite see the results right away. You come back to square one and you kind of keep going round and round, right? So in a situation like that, well, there's two specific things we have to discuss. Number one, we would have to know where your preference would be in the short term, because no matter what route you go with your golf swing, you're probably going to add a bias in one direction or another with the curve, like we just discussed, right?
Right.
But then number two, you cannot do too big of a change right away, because you would end up too severely in those situations that we just spoke about. Meaning you can't stand there and be like, oh, my left arm is out here and my club's here, which literally was your golf swing right now. And let's just try to keep the arm in so we can turn. Because no, now you're here and you're going to jump and you're really in trouble. It would have to be a situation where you would have to take on that process a lot more incrementally if you want to actually have a long-term fix. Meaning, let's say we want to prevent the pull hooks from happening. I mean, in a situation like that, the cheat would be to just change the face angle by changing the grip, but that's not really going to actually help your situation. The hands being so far out in front of you, in my opinion, is much more troublesome, right? And so you would work on getting the hands just marginally more in. The second you do that, we can get the body to jump a little bit less. Then you get the hands working marginally more in, then you get the body to jump a little bit less. But it doesn't have to be huge changes. They would have to be just subtle changes that are enough to see the ball flight start to alter. And then from there, as soon as it starts to become maybe too much for what you want, then we offset it with the other adjustment. Meaning we get the hands a little bit in, it adds a little bit of a draw curve and all of that, and a little bit more shallow. But then we immediately fix a little bit of the jumpiness at the bottom. But I don't think you can necessarily just stand there on the range right now and try to keep the right hit back and just turn, because it's just going to get super steep on you. And I can't imagine you sticking with that long term.
Okay. And the way to get the hands not far out, like incrementally, would be start getting them a little bit deeper at the top of the backswing?
So theoretically, you can do that. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. For me personally, I actually quite like the sequence of how the arms are moving. Yes, that would be one solution. That would be the short way to answer that. I also do believe you can afford to just try to feel like these arms are lowering a little bit more behind you coming down through a lot of we get to the top and we feel almost a little bit Jim Furyk-esque with how the hands kind of stay back. Yes, your arms are a little bit taller. If you want to facilitate it, I would get the hands deeper. I think that's the easier, obvious solution. But I don't necessarily think it's the only option. I do believe you can work on it through the downswing. You would have to see which feel you prefer in that situation, because you can kind of work on it both ways. Because I do believe your hands have a tendency of shooting out a little bit too aggressively, and I do believe the sequence of that can change in transition as well.
Okay, and if you were to commit to the cut, what would be the first thing you would do there? Just not let the club face get as close?
No, not even. Actually, if I'm you and I'm trying to go to a fade, I'm just getting the hands marginally deeper in the backswing and then just only working on the pivot, and that's it.
So that's kind of a more simpler long-term fix.
If you give me an open canvas to decide what curvature you want, that's the situation I'm taking personally. I'm just getting the hands. I'm getting the hands deeper because it solves part of your steepness and hand path problem. And then I'm just getting you to rotate. The rotation is always going to want to work your path left because it's not like you're going to get super shallow just by getting a little bit deeper. But at least it would stay somewhat controlled and you wouldn't like get super steep on it in that situation.
Yeah, that makes more sense. But my hands being behind will not lead to a pull. It'll still result in a cut.
Well, that obviously depends on how the face adapts to the path getting left. If you are doing it, and let's say you do it in this hypothetical scenario, right? Like we get the arms a little bit deeper just to create a little bit of space for the hands for you to turn. And then you do start to turn better. If let's say we got the path somewhere just slightly left of target, but you're always pulling it, I mean, the face angle to change is the easiest thing. You have a very strong grip. It doesn't take much for us to manipulate that just a little bit.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So my personal preference is that. Now, if you want to play the draw, it would have to be a little bit of a slower process just because of how extremely steep and how out in front of you the hands are. Your swing is really not built to draw right now. Your DNA is screaming fade. So if you want to play a draw, we would have to go through a little bit slower. The only other option you have, and I have to tell you it because it is an option, right? Even if it's not my personal preference, is you can always close the alignment and get deeper and then just turn hard. And the closed alignment might keep your path right.
Okay. I'm not looking for.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't want a quick fix. Like I enjoy the process of, improving and getting my swing in the right place. So, if you think that my motions are more suited for playing a fade, like I just haven't been successful with that in the past.
Right. I mean, my personal suggestion is play the fade. I think it's easier for you.
Got it.
I think you can't play the fade right now because your club and hands are so steep coming down that you react to it. I think if you got the hands a little bit more behind you, the club would be just on a shallow enough plane to free you up to turn without being too shallow that your path stays to the right. And I think you would have a lot more freedom to get the body to turn, and you can get the path slightly left and fade. That would, if I foreshadowed ahead, and I've seen this pattern happen often enough, I think you'd be able to pull that off, and your DNA certainly tells me that.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Amazing. Fantastic. And I think the thing is, Chris, no matter what change you make, even for Sean and Todd and Ben, everything's a process, isn't it? You know what I mean? Everything's incremental, everything takes time. And, I think for so long, like the narrative, whether you're watching a YouTube thing, it's like, do this one thing and hit it 30 yards longer, or, this one, fix, or this one simple tip will change everything. It's almost like it's just a fantasy. Like everything is, how do I integrate it over time? How do I then take it onto the golf course when I've got so much stimulus, when I've got my playing partners are standing there, I've got water on the right, the wind's coming off the left, and then I'm still trying to get in, and change the way the body works, sort of thing. So for everyone out there, everything's a process, and it's just be so much more patient with yourself. Like I still work with my mentor that I've been working with for 20 years. Like, I still, and working on the same stuff I started, working on 20 years, and I'll be working on it for another 20. And obviously you're getting better all the time, and your ball strike, all that stuff's improving, but it is just so much more of a process. And, I think, Chris, as you said, you've got to enjoy the process as well, don't you? Take your time, film it, stand in front of mirrors, just pick up golf clubs wherever you are and just, jump in front of a reflection and do a little bit more to train the body and just get really good at that stuff. Because like trying to go from that incredible, IP and information that Shauheen's just given you, to then taking that out on Saturday, there's a bigger distance between the two. You know what I mean? So just for everyone out there, just be patient with yourself, enjoy the process, and chip away at it, I suppose I'd say. So, mate, that's an hour. That absolutely flies. I hope the four of you really got a lot out of that. I think, obviously really good information. Take your time with it. And for everyone out there that's been watching, thank you so much for tuning in and for staying all the way to the end. Shauheen's actually doing an offer that's only going to go for like 2.5 days or something, which is 20% off individual lessons and then 20% off the first month of a subscription. And all you got to do is use the code Shauheen20 at checkout on Skillest, and you'll get 20% off, which he doesn't do very often. So yeah, awesome deal for everyone that stayed to the end. So we really, really appreciate it. So Shauheen, thanks for that, mate. Always an absolute pleasure working with you. If anything you want to say in closing, or maybe give everyone an idea of what you're up to over, the next couple of months towards the end of summer.
An update on what I'm doing. I'm staying in Montreal for the next 2 months. The weather's going to be really good, and I don't have any intentions to travel. I might go to one of Stephen Ames's tour events coming up that's nearby, but for the most part, I'll be staying here. And what kind of information I want to leave everybody off with? I mean, look, I would say be careful with the type of information you consume on the internet, because although it can be very helpful, a lot of it is spoken to the masses and not specifically catered to a specific pattern or individual. So sometimes you can take information that sounds good, but if it doesn't apply to you, you might go down a rabbit hole. So just worst case, if you see information from a coach you like, whether from me or someone else, ask them questions beforehand just to make sure it's actually applying to your game so that you don't waste too much time when you practice.
Such a great piece of advice. And I think everyone out there would be able to, everyone has been through the experience where they've just watched a million things like, I've got no idea where I am now. Like, I'm completely lost. And it's because none of it's customized. So at the very least, if it's someone on Skillest, if it's Shauheen, like, message, say, hey, I saw this thing you did. What did you mean by this? And once you start getting context around information, how it relates to you, then you can actually adapt it. So, all right, everyone. There you go. Thanks so much. Stay tuned. There's going to be plenty more of these coming. So, and thanks, boys, for participating. That was great.
Thank you.